AI, of course, has been the buzzword of 2023, and it was back in the headlines this week. To name just a few, Sergey Brin has returned to Google. The White House says OpenAI and Google have pledged to watermark AI content for safety, and Apple is developing its own artificial intelligence systems. And now, according to the White House, some of the big names, Amazon, Google, Meta, have entered a new agreement voluntarily that will manage the risks associated with AI. So, there's a lot going on. But is the hype, the positive chatter, taking a downturn? Our next guest thinks it might be. Let's bring in Duke professor and the former chief innovation officer for the FDIC, Sultan Meghji. Sultan, it's good to see you again. You know, this year has been quite a ride when it comes to AI. And there has been, certainly in the market, a lot of enthusiasm around it. Where do you think we are in the AI hype cycle?
Well, it's great to be back. And that's a fantastic question because so much of AI right now is just driven by marketing teams and not actually by technologies. And so I think it's not surprising at all that, when we're talking about the hype cycle, so much has been announced. There's so many, glittering logos and great press releases and arguments on social media and things like that. But we haven't actually seen a lot of work being done. And the current generation of AIs are really going to start having impacts over the next few years where they, do things like streamline back office processes and things like that. But that's a completely separate set of activities from what gets covered by the news.
Sultan, so, okay, yes, AI is supposed to take on more roles within more businesses, whether it's streamlining or being an assistant in news, apparently, whatever that means. But there's been some reporting that AI is not as intelligent as it used to be, as you layer in this, kind of machine learning from itself and this kind of feeding frenzy on itself, making it dumber. Have you seen that in any of your research?
Absolutely. Pretty much all of the large language models out there are showing signs of, in essence, the wrong side of reinforcement learning. So in AI, you have to be really careful with the data that you use to train it. And at some point, it will, kind of stop having positive returns. It'll stop getting smarter. And you need to stop and kind of take a step back at that point and really be more focused on the kinds of data you're analyzing, or just say, what, for now, this is the best we're going to be able to do. And, we're starting to see that. I think pretty much every single major tech company's openly available LLM is showing some sign of plateauing in terms of its capabilities.
Some of them, Sultan, at least according to some reports I've seen, are not just plateauing, but getting dumber, for lack of a better word. I mean, I feel bad calling something dumb, but I guess it's not alive, so it's okay. But, I get that it would plateau, but why would it regress?
Well, so many of these systems are just based on fundamentally learning from what's openly available on the internet. And let's be honest, a lot of what's out there on the internet isn't that great. And if we run out of data to train because you've looked at the entire internet and all you can do then is look at the data that has been generated on your own system, you're in essence drinking from the same well that you're feeding into. And so, it's not surprising at all to me that, I think in one report, one of the LLMs, could do math very well a few months ago, and now all of a sudden it can't even do 2 + 2 reliably. And that's, that speaks to this fact that the data that they're training these on is not growing at the rate that the systems themselves are growing.
So, Sultan, there had been some criticism about where Apple was with regard to AI, especially when you think about the context of ChatGPT and Microsoft being a front runner now there. And now Apple apparently creating its own, according to some reporting, Apple GPT, or what their Ajax, I think that's what the name is, that they're calling what they're working on. Who do you think is going to be the winner in this space?
Well, I hope you're not asking me to bet against Apple, because that seems like a dangerous thing to do. But, Apple has a long history. It's part of their culture of an organization. They weren't the first personal computer. IBM was. They weren't the first smartphone. We all had BlackBerries before that. I guess I'm not surprised at all that they've taken a slightly slower approach, a more engineering-centric approach than many of these other organizations. But they also, as one of the few trillion-dollar tech companies out there, have a massive consumer base. And the minute they decide to release something like that, millions, if not hundreds of millions of people will be using it within 24 hours. And, when you have that kind of scale, you have to be very thoughtful about introducing a new feature that has the support on the back end. one thing that most people might not realize is our growth in artificial intelligence is limited by the numbers of CPUs and GPUs that can actually do the math that makes them work. And if all of a sudden you have to add 100 million users to an AI system, you have to have a fair amount of infrastructure behind that. And it's possible that they just don't have it.
Yeah, well, that explains the enthusiasm and the demand for NVIDIA chips and shares, for example. But again, to sort of talk about where we are in the cycle with Apple sort of being a little more cautious about it, maybe we should also take a lesson from Apple. I mean, I think about all of the hype cycles that we have gone through in the past decade, from crypto to the metaverse, even to full self-driving, where the talk was big and the yield either didn't materialize at all or has been much, much slower than the proponents would have said. And I kept hearing at the beginning of this year, well, AI is different than that. That, it's such a big thing and can affect so much. Was that just fundamentally wrong, or is it just the timeline is way more extended?
Well, that's an absolutely fantastic way to frame it. And I would say it's the timeline. The metaphor that I use is the cloud. The phrase the cloud was really coined in 2007, 2008. And it's taken many organizations, through 2023 to even have a cloud strategy. And so, the US government where I work, we weren't fully on the cloud by a long shot, still aren't. And there are time considerations that most people don't realize when you're talking about impacts of massively scaled technologies. So if we will go from 2008 to 2023 and we aren't still fully on the cloud, with AI being, in my opinion, an even more impactful technology, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we're talking about a multi-decade journey to really realize the benefits of artificial intelligence.
And Sultan, you talked about the data to train it earlier and how, I guess if you put stupid in, you get stupid out. Where does the responsibility lie with regard to training AI, especially when you think about the potential or the use case within law enforcement and just the legal field in general to prevent against discriminatory bias?
I mean, discrimination, not just in law enforcement, but also in basic things like, making credit or lending decisions. Mm-hmm. There is a tremendous risk attached to that. And so, the Biden administration, approaching artificial intelligence as a risk, which is what they've done, shows that they have thought about this front and center. The challenge is just like the internet itself, government can't do it alone. The private sector can't do it alone. Academia can't do it alone. All of those organizations, including, the average American, the average human, need to be part of this discussion because the current laws, the current regulations don't take these kinds of technologies into account. And we need new systems, new regulations, new ways of thinking about this, in my opinion. And we need to build that. And that, for the most part, doesn't exist yet. And so, hearing that some companies will, put some watermarking in there or choose to collaborate in a non-official capacity with the U.S. government is a great step, but that doesn't actually solve the broader problem.